Hey everyone, welcome back to part 2 of the first episode of the Legions Initiative podcast. And if you haven't checked out the first part already, I highly recommend you do so, where we talk about the recent bannings and unbannings in Modern and Commander. However, in this episode, Kristen and I will be providing our answers to the questions put forth in the 2019 Commander Summit by the Command Zone. Just as a quick note, we did have a couple audio issues at the beginning, but they'll generally get better as things move along. But with that, let's get going. What was your reaction to receiving the email from the Command Zone?
Yeah, so they tweeted me to ask for my email address, I guess because it wasn't in my profile. The brain does a lot of thinking when you get a message like that. It was like, wow, what is this about? It's not the game night's email, but it's pretty close, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I sort of had a quick chat with Ashlyn and asked her if you, wow, like, what an opportunity.
Yeah, it's
This is
super
cool.
exciting. Yeah, it's so exciting. I didn't get a tweet beforehand. They just sent me an email, so like it just showed up in my inbox one day, and I was like kid in a candy store jumping on the bed like Home Alone style, excited.
Right?
So, and the other thing too is that like I wasn't sure if I was on their radar or not, and I've had one or two videos in the past that were like a bit critical of some of their stuff, and just like wasn't sure like if it was on their radar, like if they would even consider me for something like that. So it was
Yeah.
pretty cool to get asked, and I was very excited.
There is a
Um,
thing as well of like, until the video went up, I had no idea who else was going to be part of it.
yeah,
And I obviously, well, I hope PJ is because every skin creators, I've been just slamming those tweets like, get Commander replay on.
yeah, and I appreciate that. And a lot of people have been saying similar things too. And like same sort of thing is that I didn't really want to talk about it with anyone else either because it's sort of like, all right, who didn't make the team, that sort of thing. And you don't want to like make anyone feel bad because they didn't get asked. So I largely didn't talk about it. And I mean, it was probably what about 3 months ago, give or take, when when we actually turned in the video submissions.
Yeah, and that's, I think, another thing interesting to think about is that that's a long time to sort of think about your opinion about something and maybe change it.
Yeah, and some of mine have changed a little bit since my initial reactions. Now, like I talked about a little bit, you have one response in the video, I have one response in the video, and there are some things that I would modify to the one response that I gave, and we'll get to those in a minute. But also some of the other things too, some of my responses that probably won't show up anywhere. Um, I think I've also shifted on slightly in that period of time. A lot of the main concept still holds up, but there were some interesting points posed by some of the other content creators in there, and we'll get into those. So,
Sure.
with that, are you ready for the first question?
Let's jump into it.
So, this is probably got to be one of the most controversial or the most like discussed of the questions on here, and I like this one a lot. What do you think of planeswalkers as commanders? Should the rule be changed or remain the same?
Okay, so I think the first thing that I'd like to ask you is, have you played any Oathbreaker?
I have not, but I've heard people talking about it, and I've heard it's very fast.
Yeah, sure. So, Oathbreaker, a distinction before we talk about this anymore. I think comparing this question to the Oathbreaker format is kind of a stretch. Everyone is on a lower life total. Decks are built differently. There's not as much durdling, and someone quite quickly. Now, that is a way to answer a Planeswalker. Sure, compare that to a format with 40 life. That main difference for me is that is a lot more than 20. It's not the same approach.
Right.
But yeah, to get into it,
What's the starting life total in Oathbreaker? I forget.
20.
20. Whew, yeah. Yeah, you can just like bolt people's face from 20. Like, that's
Sure.
not a luxury that you have in Commander. So you need a lot of things to go right to do 40 damage in Commander. Like, you can't just, do that all at once. 20, burn starts to look very good. Small aggressive creatures start to look very good. Doing 40 damage in Commander with like a 1 mana 2/2 probably isn't going to happen.
It's not going to
Um,
cut it,
yeah.
is it? I don't think they should be legalist commanders. And I think that my main issue is that it changes the gameplay. I think it changes the gameplay intrinsically to decentralize creatures and creature combat and incentivize having access to a combo in the command zone or access to ways to disincentivize opponents from playing creatures.
Right.
I think that a lot of people have said, like, well, you can attack them with your creatures or you can use removal. And it's like, if you're attacking the planeswalker, not the player, and if you're pushing creatures out of your hand when you ordinarily would probably hold them back because of tempo,
You can't.
cover from that in certain colors. And they're the colors that we like to play a lot, right?
Right.
It's important to think about the idea of tempo and card advantage. And I think that Planeswalkers as commanders is just play your creatures out and kill them. It's like, well, as a red or white player, like I have to be very careful about how many permanents. And if I'm being pressured to play something like Lyra Dawnbringer to deal with a Planeswalker, there's three other potential players that have Planeswalkers that don't want that Lyra to resolve, right?
Right.
And even
Yeah.
if it does, there's things like Ugin, there's things like Chandra in the command zone. Like, if you sit down at a table and you see one, you're not going to play any creatures, right?
Right. So, you bring up a lot of good points. The first about like, oh, just attack it with your creatures. One of my big issues is that if you have a planeswalker out of the command zone, you are doing everything in your power to get that planeswalker down before the turn of its converted mana cost. If you have a 4 mana walker, you are trying so very hard to go mana crypt or soul ring on turn 1 to get that planeswalker into play on turn 2. When you start talking about turn 2 planeswalkers, even the most aggressive decks have trouble dealing with that. Like the only creature that really effectively deals with an early planeswalker is Sarah Ascendant. And, periodically I hear people talk about, oh, you should ban Sarah Ascendant. Sarah Ascendant's fine. Yeah, it's strong, but it takes what, like 8 turns for Sarah Ascendant to kill you if all they do is attack you with Sarah Ascendant every turn? Just play a single removal spell, you'll be fine. But
Exactly.
um, like Sarah Ascendant is the only creature that really effectively deals with a planeswalker quickly, and it doesn't have haste. Even as an Aurelia player, and I'm sure you have done this a lot too, where you cast Aurelia out of the command zone. If you don't have equipments that you can put on it, yeah, you can swing into the planeswalkers with haste, which is cool, but a lot of times they have more than 3 loyalty, and if there's multiple planeswalkers in play, you can't kill more than one of them typically. So, even big haste creatures like that aren't the best answer to planeswalkers because that planeswalker deck is built in a way that they're going to try to keep you from attacking all those planeswalkers. So,
Sure,
yeah,
just playing Planeswalkers means that you're going to build your deck to stop creatures, right? Even if your
exactly.
Planeswalker commander doesn't have a board wipe, it's not Elspeth, it's this that can wipe the board. You're going to be playing so many answers. I mean, I know that. I've built an Atraxa Super Friends deck. I joke
Right.
that it's tribal board wipes.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't care about creatures. You will wipe the board every single turn if you have to. And yeah,
Sometimes all it takes is a turn 2 Liliana, the Last Hope, into a board wipe, and you win.
right. Yeah. Like you get that emblem and that emblem. How do you stop that? You know, you you have to either go big above it or just wipe the board every turn yourself, and that's just a lot to ask. So,
Yeah. And I think one of the classic ways that the more controlling or conniving players will try and win a game is to let the aggro deck play out its hand so that they have no resources left and let them deal with all the threats,
yep.
right? And I think that that does happen from time to time. And sometimes even as the aggro player, you end up as the control player,
Yeah.
particularly if you're playing enough answers. But I think in a format where there are so many planeswalkers in the command zone, like you're going to be in that position a lot more, and you can't redraw your hand quick enough. And once you've played all those answers out,
Right. And there's other issues too. So like you talk about it, if you're the aggro deck and you play your entire hand, anyone plays a board wipe and you're out of the game now because all your stuff's dead. And another thing too is the repeatable advantage from planeswalkers. So most of the ones that people are going to want to play are generating a lot of value one way or another. Here's some words that should scare you. Turn 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor.
wow.
Yeah. Isn't magic fun? Like just fate seal everyone into oblivion, brainstorm at will, bounce any creatures that are going to hit the board. Like, how do you stop that? Multiple players are going to need to present answers to a turn 2 Jace. Like, that will be miserable.
And I think in some ways as well, the new London Mulligan makes it just that bit better to have a planeswalker.
Right. And we'll get to that in a little bit. And interestingly, when I talked about the London Mulligan, I also did talk about that same thing when I did my video response, but we'll get there in a sec. But yeah, like when you're talking about planeswalkers, especially the monocolor ones or even the two color ones, if you're looking at a planeswalker that's like two color color, that's a really easy thing to get into play on turn two. I do like some of the Commander 18 planeswalkers because they're multicolor. And you can't just go Mana Rock turn one into turn two Planeswalker because of all the different color requirements.
Right.
You need a more specific hand to do that. If you go like Soul Ring Signet turn one, then it becomes possible, but that's a much harder hand to
Mm.
have.
I think Wizards does a very good job at slightly overcosting because they're illegal,
Right.
and slightly making them more difficult to play and cast, and also having their effects take a little bit of time to wind up. I mean, Teferi excluded because
Yeah.
Teferi, but
Yeah. And
by
so
and large,
right, but that's a perfect example. The first round of Planeswalker as commanders that they did, you have Teferi, which is like stupidly broken. You have Duretti, which is pretty good, but Duretti always comes down before turn four. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone cast a turn four Duretti. And then you get into this battle of, oh, can we kill Duretti before it ultimates? And Duretti has a ton of loyalty. So you're swinging away and it's not dying and they're still generating value every turn. And they're getting ahead because they're generating value while all you're trying to do is get rid of this Duretti. And the thing that I don't like about planeswalkers as commanders is that when you get to turn 10, everyone's still at 40. Be-
right?
because all you've been doing is attacking planeswalkers all game and they recast them and they come back. No one's lost any life, which means now you're talking about the combo player having a significant advantage because the aggro decks, when you have to do 120, you need a lot of things for that to happen. And it's much easier if everyone's at 20. It's so much easier to just alpha strike players out of the game than if everyone's still at 40.
Right. And
Uh,
I mean, it's fine to occasionally have one sub game or two with a commander, but repeatable from the command zone and playing all of those sub games. Like, I know that like for a lot of people, the length of a commander game is not important, but I would rather have like two or three games than one long one. And
right.
if you're gonna play those sub games within a game, like that game is gonna go on a lot longer.
Right. I had the unfortunate situation a few weeks ago. I played 2 games in 5 hours, and, it was not
Ugh,
great. Yeah. Uh, I realized for me in paper, about 90 minutes. About 90 minutes, I start to get antsy, then I'm just like, "I don't care who wins, someone just win the game, please." Like,
right, right. It's the
um
same reason why like I tend to avoid, if at all possible, playing a five-player game
yeah.
because
Yeah.
who's
If
got
you play
time for
5
that?
players, you should do, like, Sheriff or something like that, or one of the
I like
alternate
the
where you can.
roles one with like the king and the assassin and all that stuff.
Right, right, right,
Yeah,
because that helps speed the game up and kinda. What I noticed in 5 player is that if you just have 5 player free for all, the combo player is usually going to win because that's the only way to do enough damage quickly to everyone at the board.
right, exactly. And if we wind that back to our discussion about planeswalkers as commanders, people will play and test that format. They will realize that no, they can't swing at people and turn creatures sideways because it doesn't do enough.
Right,
So everyone will just play the arms race and go straight into combo, right?
right. And so here's an example. Let's say you or I are in a game and we're playing Aurelia. 3 other players, your opponents at the table are Jace the Mind Sculptor, Garrick Wildspeaker, and let's say I don't know, let's say like a Gideon ally of Zendikar or something like that.
Sure.
How do you win that game?
I mean, the first thing is like, what's your threat assessment? Because that's something that you do when you sit down at a table, right?
Right.
So you probably think, well, mono white's probably not as good as the other two.
Gideon on turn two spitting out tokens. Doesn't sound terrible.
No, it doesn't. I mean, yeah. So I think maybe Gideon was maybe going to take that question sideways a little bit. Sure. So Garrick, it's like if you don't answer that Garrick, you just get so much value.
Right.
But at the same time, if you don't answer that Jace, there's so much value, but you can only answer one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, what do you do? I run Hour of Revelation a lot, which is like one of the few answers to a situation like that. But even still, by the time you play that, they've already gotten tons of value out of using their planeswalker a bunch of times.
They might be
And
able to counter anyway at that point, right?
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
Hour of
Jace player at the
Revelation
table.
is a super sweet card. I love running it. But that's another interesting point. It's like a couple of the arguments have been, there's answers to planeswalkers. You've got burn spells, you've got effects like Beast Within or Generous Gift. you also have creatures, but created equal. All colors, barring green to a certain extent, have ways to wipe the board of creatures, for instance.
Right.
Um, but planeswalker removal is not that widespread.
Right, yeah. I looked through all the red burn spells for a video I did a few weeks ago, and when you're talking about, like, cheaply costed burn spells to get rid of a planeswalker, the options are not great. Um,
I mean, there's the lovely staple Magma Quake, which is great,
yeah, I gotta run that card more. That's a good
but
one.
you can't Sunforger it.
No, you can't. And it takes a lot of mana, which, I guess you gotta make sure you're ramping and hitting all your lands the right way, but, if you have a high loyalty planeswalker that comes down early and starts ticking up, it's probably gonna stay out of Magma Quake range. Maybe you can bring it down and get it to 1 or 2 loyalty, but you might not always be able to kill it.
Mm.
Um
And then we're talking about it just shifts. It just comes back to my point of it shifts gameplay in a lot of different ways. Like
Right.
now we're getting on to shifting deck building, right?
Right, you're shifting your deck building to deal with the fact that you're just trying to race this planeswalker to get rid of it, and while you're spending all your time doing that, that player can just set up the combo really easily because you're preoccupied with dealing with the planeswalker, they're still at 40, and yeah, I don't like it. I don't
But
like
I
it.
mean that's the difference with Oathbreaker, right? Because like in Commander, chip damage to a certain extent from small creatures doesn't matter a huge amount. But it really does, and it's super valuable to making those games go quickly.
Right, and I would be remiss not to mention these, like, if you do this planeswalker thing, you definitely have to ban Doubling Season and the Chain Veil.
Right, sure. I think one of the other things that I mentioned in the response I recorded was that as much as like, oh, we could just ban these cards, it's like I don't like giving
The rules committee.
too much to do. Not that I don't think they're capable of making good decisions, but I don't think over centralizing and over relying on them is something that we want to be doing. I don't think
Right,
it's a place we want to be because decisions that have to be made, the more chance there is that a wrong decision will be made,
right,
right?
right. And so one thing I do want to talk about too is when I did my video response, I pretty much took the line that I just took, which is no, absolutely not on the Planeswalkers as commanders. I do like what Seth said that you should try it for a period of time. I would be okay with that as long as at the end of that period of time, we're all in agreement that like this is not a good thing.
Yeah, sure. And I think that it's interesting as well because I don't think Oathbreaker was as popular when I recorded my response.
Right. Yeah.
And
No.
it certainly didn't blow that response was recorded. And in some ways, it does make it easier to still have that position of a hard no, because
Right.
now there is a format where you can do that
Right.
and
Just go
have
play
fun, right?
Oathbreaker. And, while we're talking about that, I want to play my legendary creatures in Oathbreaker. So if you can have planeswalkers in Commander, I can have legendary creatures in Oathbreaker.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I I won't lie to you. I have also made that joke.
I think a lot of people have, and it just cracks me up. Like I get a kick out of it every time. So,
Mhm.
uh, any other thoughts on planeswalkers as commanders?
Did kind of get the idea that they are like the flagship characters of the game in a sense, but I think like there's already so much focus on them in the intro decks and the Planeswalker decks and the Netflix season
Netflix, yeah.
that we don't need them to be on everything. Like we don't need a serial.
Right,
like
yeah. Planeswalker bites.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, that'd be good. Talking about the series really quickly, I hope Jace dies in the first episode. I'm crossing my fingers.
Might
It's
be how
not
it
gonna happen.
starts.
It's not gonna happen, but, I remain hopeful. Anyway, moving on from Planeswalkers, question number 2. What do you think of the current hybrid mana rules? Change or remain the same?
Okay, so I really enjoy the color pie and thinking about the color pie and thinking about how game theory fits around the color pie.
Right.
I've also found this really cool article on com. We can maybe link it in the description.
Yeah, we'll link the
Um,
article in the description.
that is basically someone approaching the color pie from a sort of philosophical psychology kind of route. And they make a really good argument that it's probably more accurate than like the Myers Briggs typing.
Okay.
So like I love thinking about the color pie and stuff like that. So this is a really interesting question. And ultimately, I kind of came to the conclusion that consistent enough that it's probably a no, which I can go into a little bit in detail in a moment, but I'd like to hear what you think too.
Yeah, I was pretty much a hard no on this one just because like at its core, a hybrid card is a gold card and if you look at just a regular costed gold card, you can't play a gold card that's outside of your colors. My opinion is sort of just a, like the conservative viewpoint on it, which is no, it doesn't fit the colors. It doesn't get to be
Or,
in your deck.
I mean, and I've got a good example actually that can probably sort of illustrate your opinion and mine, I guess. And that is something that will as Forest players, and that is the Nahiri Planeswalker from War of the Spark, Nahiri Storm and Stone.
Okay.
She is hybrid white-red, and her static ability to make equip costs cost one less is something that I could see in red or white. Her downtick, which then deals damage to creatures, is definitely just red, right? It's not
Hmm.
white. And that's a nice, easy way to say, look, this doesn't work. Like,
Yeah.
doesn't work. White
Yeah.
burn is not really a thing. So,
Right,
it,
exactly, and for the most part, red doesn't really do a lot with equipments, like, you have Godo and maybe 1 or 2 other things, but,
yeah, it's mostly
white.
focused on artifacts, right, rather than
Right,
equipment.
right, like, white is your most heavily focused equipment color. So, yeah, and I get that, and there's any number of other examples, where, like, oh, what can we think? Should a black deck have oh god, what's the name of that card? Memory Plunder.
Memory Plunder. Let me double check this one.
If I'm remembering it right, it's pay 4 black blue for to play a instant or sorcery out of an opponent's graveyard.
Black should definitely not have that.
Right. That seems really good in a mono black deck. In a blue black deck, like it's fine and it probably doesn't even get run most of the time. But
And
yeah, if I'm mono black, if I'm shielded, I'm probably running that thing.
it even seems a bit good for mono blue just from a cost perspective,
Right.
which I think is something that's interesting to note. Like the hybrid mana allows them to more aggressively cost effects. So if this was like just a blue spell, which I could see it being, it would probably cost at least 5 or 6 mana, with like some colorless and some combination of blue, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think 4 blue is just way too cheap for this effect if it was just a blue card, right?
Right. And where I think it'll get weird too is like, let's say you have a 3 color deck and, now you're playing a hybrid card where one of the colors is outside of that 3 color deck. It's almost like you're playing a 4 color deck. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel right to me, is, kind of where I get back to at the end of the day. I'm like,
Right?
I think it would be cool to like experiment in that space, but something to me just ultimately feels wrong about it.
Yeah. I also think that of the questions that were asked, this is the one that I've seen come up the least, at least from my perspective.
Same. Yeah, I haven't seen this. I don't actually know if I've seen this one come up before.
I know like Twitter probably is it's come up, but everything comes up on Twitter.
Right. And just, like really quick, because the command zone is so big, they probably get a really good feel on these type of like overarching questions. Like I get posed a few of these occasionally. I get asked by people, but like I don't get asked these on a large scale where they're probably getting like these questions asked to them on a very large scale. Uh,
Right, sure. So
so
even if we've not necessarily experienced something, again, two quite different people in the sense that we're in different countries and different play groups, we're still only a very, very small slice of that pie.
right, right. And that's a great point too, is that like commander means something different to everyone. Like everyone likes to play just a little bit differently. Some people like combos, some people don't. Some people like to play competitively, some people don't. Some people
Some
like to
people like
tank.
to build theme decks where everything
Right.
has to have a hat.
Right. Right, exactly. One of my Patreons was working on I've seen some Kamigawa decks. There was oh god, there's another theme that I couldn't remember. Oh, it was an interesting one. It's gone now. It's Sisay Weatherlight Captain with the crew of the Weatherlight. But yeah, like I've seen some really interesting theme decks that obviously aren't very powerful, but are very cool. You get to look at some old cards that probably didn't get enough love in any of the formats they were available in, and you get to
Hmm.
kind of explore the game in a different way. So
Yeah, right? Like, I mean, I'm in the process of building like a 4 color artifact deck, and in an effort to not just play good stuff, I kind of decided that I wanted my theme to be like a treasure hunt. So I'm going to try and play the wheels and the smothering tithe to make treasures, but I want all my other cards to make treasures too, and it'd be like a sort of archaeological dig.
Nice. I love it.
Just a little bit of restriction, it just breeds so much creativity, right?
Right, right. And yeah, so yeah, Commander means something a little bit different to everyone. Obviously, these are just our viewpoints, and there may be many other viewpoints. And I know one of the questions on this list is the ban list, and I know that I'm like in the minority in my stance on the ban list, which we'll get to later. But yeah. Anyway, moving on from that, question number 3: if the London Mulligan is adopted by competitive formats, which I believe it is now,
Mhm.
should Commander follow suit? So again, these questions were asked about 3 months ago. So some
Okay.
things have changed over that course of time. What are your thoughts on the London Mulligan?
So we've hit the first question where some content and it's made it to the video. So maybe put a timestamp for this one if people want to go and look at my response.
Okay. Yeah, we'll
Um,
put a timestamp in the description below.
Having sort of had time to think about that and play with the London Mulligan and see people's sort of thoughts on my response as well, I think that it's important to clarify like one of the things in my response that I think Jimmy and Josh maybe misunderstood slightly, which was that when I referenced higher power decks, I literally only meant competitive EDH, which I didn't. Like, I wasn't really talking about CEDH there. I was kind of just more meaning that, you know, in your friend group and the people that you like to play with, that kind of mulligan, it's probably fine, you know, go for it.
Right.
I think that the stronger decks, like I was kind of meaning sort of like the higher end of sort of non-competitive EDH, where you're maybe going to like a competitive commander night at the local game store, you don't know who you're playing with, the decks
Sure.
are all tuned up and super strong, and there's prizes on the line. It's not
I
quite competitive EDH, but I think
I call them turn 6 through turn
right,
8 decks. That's typically where a lot of those decks will win if you don't interact with them. That's how I like to think of them. So yeah, it's that tier below CEDH where it's still very fast, it's very powerful, but it's not like turn 4 fast.
right, sure. And I think that my hesitation was about those decks more than anything else. What do you think?
Yeah, that was the same sort of thing that I had. To me, it's just like, oh, well, it's a lot easier to find my mana rocks now. Find my
Oh,
mana rocks, do something explosive, go wild, is the thought
right.
that I had initially as well.
Honestly, like if I was, I don't take these statistics, but I know a lot of people do, and I think it's cool, and I probably should. But when I play games, I think that the percentage of games in which I will be able to resolve a Sword of the Animist on a body and start ramping, the win percentage on those games is so much higher than the games I don't.
Right. Yeah.
Being able to like effectively dig for that slightly easier, but it does make me wonder what other things can be dug for easier at slightly higher power.
Right. Sword of the Animist on a creature is very good. There are things that are more powerful and more efficient than putting Sword of the Animist on a creature and, that generate value in some way or another
Right.
than, that particular combo, or especially with Aurelia, it's a combo.
So, like, what a good example, I guess, is my I have an Ailey Eternal Pilgrim deck, and that deck like has some really bad opening hands. You don't want to draw like your late game large bodies. You don't want to draw reanimator targets in your opening hand, really.
Right.
You want to be drawing like sisters. You want to be drawing some card draw to have a sort of path through the game in your opening hand, and that deck will certainly benefit from this London Mulligan because it has a lot more non-games than some of my other decks.
Right. And here's an example. So your opening hand, you've mulliganed down to 6. You have 2 lands in your opening hand and let's say 4 6 drops. That hand's not keepable.
No,
If you're looking at 7 and that 7th card is a Sylvan Library, that hand becomes keepable now.
it's a windmill slam.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know what I mean? Could also be a Soul Ring, a Mana Vault. There are a lot of things where that 7th card makes that hand now keepable, playable, and possibly even good. That one extra card can kind of change everything.
Right, and I think it's important to note as well that for those people that are unsure, there is still the free mulligan to 7 because it's a multiplayer format. So before you have to do any London mulliganing, there is still a free mulligan to 7.
Yeah. So one of the other things I don't like about it is right when all the talk about the London Mulligan started, someone asked me, how many lands should I run if the London Mulligan gets adopted? And
Oh
my
man,
response was, yeah, my response was, the London Mulligan isn't an excuse to run less lands.
right?
And and I thought about this. God, I've been thinking about this for months now. This is like 3 months ago, and it's still in my mind. Command zone study. The player with the most lands is most likely to win. Why would you want to run less lands?
It's crazy. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
like this one permanent type, having more of them has a direct correlation to your likelihood of winning. Why do you want to run less of them?
Hmm. Which I think runs quite nicely onto the part that I then talked about, which is the lazy deck building.
Right.
Yeah, Jimmy and Josh made a good point. I don't think it's as sort of as like going back to like partial Paris, for instance, which I did mention. Um, but I do think it's going to have an effect on people's deck building, and I think that the part that I'm a little bit about is not that people will have less consistent decks and they will have less good games themselves because of it. It's more about the table experience. And if you lower the percentage on and cut enough corners on your deck, and then at least one other person in the pod is doing the same, there are going to be less opportunities to stop a combo player going off. There are going to be less chances to stay in a game and keep things balanced. And I think it's not having a huge impact, but it's having enough of an impact on your games that you will notice it.
Right. Now, I want to focus in on your lazy deck building thing for a bit. I agree with that 100%. So, I run 37 or more lands in pretty much every deck that I play. And if I don't, it's because I'm running like probably 4 copies of Tithe, Land Tax, Gift of Estates, and Friends. I don't have to mulligan very often. Like, once I take my free mulligan, I rarely have to go to 6. Like, it's such a rare occurrence for me. I almost never get land screwed because of the amount of mana and mana production that I run. People that get mana screwed aren't running enough lands. And what I've realized is that most people that don't run enough lands will do like literally anything to not run more lands. That's like
Right.
literally the last thing that they want to do. But it's like if you're running 34, 35 lands, you will get mana screwed some amount of the time. You're not going to draw that fourth or fifth land on time, and you're going to get stuck.
Right.
Because I
And
run
there are some decks that I run that I have gone down to what I believe is the minimum 36. And I have a low curve, and because my deck is aggressive and fast. But
right,
even then, with 36, I sometimes struggle and I have to mulligan a lot.
right, and this is a thing that I've thought about a lot. The number of lands you do run, it is a little bit dependent on color. Because like green, for example, has cultivates. So if you hit a cultivate early, that that does a lot of good things for your mana base. If you're a
Mm.
green deck and you miss that cultivate, like I've seen green decks get stuck because, they rely so heavily on those type of effects that, if they're only running like 34, 35 lands, they might have trouble drawing just their third land even cast cultivate, let
Right.
alone trying to get to like a sixth or seventh land.
And I've seen people use the justification as well that like a mana rock equals X amount of lands in in a deck, and I'm like, no, no,
It
no, it
doesn't. It
doesn't.
does. It doesn't. It does not.
I think that one of the best videos that I can refer people to is that the Command Zone have done is their general guidance numbers for the amount of different effects you want in a deck,
Right.
um, and that is independent of anything else. It doesn't change depending on how many lands you've got or anything like that.
Right. So, I want to be clear. I've said 37 or more on my channel multiple times in no uncertain terms. There are decks that can run less than. They are very few and far between. Like you need a very low curve and a very specific plan about why it's okay to run such a low land count in your deck. CEDH, you see low land counts, you'll see things like 30 lands, but they make up for that with like 15 mana dorks. So, that mana production is
Lots of fast mana, right?
right, exactly. So that mana production is coming from somewhere. It doesn't necessarily need to be lands. But if you're seeing a more standard build commander deck that's got 5 and 6 drops with like 33, 34 lands, you're going to miss that fifth and sixth land drop fairly often. And those 5 and 6 drops, you should expect them to be late. And like I said, I rarely have these issues because I run so many lands. Even if I don't have any acceleration in my opening hand, I can pretty much be sure that I'm going to see at least 5 or 6 lands on time so I can get to my 5 and 6 drops when I want to.
Yeah, I agree. And I've got a pretty interesting example as well. When I built my Edgar Markov deck on paper, most of my expensive decks. So I made the conscious decision that because I wanted to have a low curve and I wanted to play the minimum amount of lands that I could, which in this case in that deck is now 37. I actually made the deck mostly just black and white. I have a couple of red spells. I have the 3 mana Lord that gives the first strike, and I have Edgar,
Yep.
obviously. And I have red sources in my mana base. I have one mountain, and then I have some different shocklands and things like that.
Right.
But the mana costs of a lot of the vampire cards are very hungry. They want double black or double
Yep.
white or white black. I had to make that deck building choice that I was just going to go, well, do you know what? Slash, that I'm just going to not run a lot of red cards that I probably could or should run if I had a better mana base
Yep.
and just concentrate on white black because that is how I'm going to win.
Right. And that's a great decision, by the way. Like you're recognizing that like you don't have the money in the resources to get all the shocks, fetches, duels for, a perfect 3-color mana base. So you're just like, well, I don't want to have to cast like Falconwrath Gorger or Stromkirk Noble because I can't guarantee that I'll have red mana on turn 1.
Right, right. And it runs very well. And to be honest, like I don't struggle to cast Edgar Markov on the occasion that I want to cast him to be in a position where I was struggling to cast my spells.
Right. And so one of the big questions I have with that deck, because I've been playing it myself as well, and I've been noticing that same trend where it's like I've thought about just going more swamps and really kind of trying to eliminate some of the non-black stuff from the deck, especially the early stuff for the mana base reasons.
Mm.
But the question is, if you're playing an Edgar Markov deck, do you plan to cast your commander and do you plan to do it on time? Because everything else in that deck is super cheap, which means that if you make no plan to cast Edgar Markov on time, you can get away with significantly less lands than if you make the decision that, yes, I want to be casting Edgar Markov because it costs
Right.
6 mana.
Yeah,
So,
sure. And I think that is actually look at our deck list, but I'm gonna make the assumption that yours is a lower curve than mine. Mine's a bit more mid-range.
yeah,
I tend to play like I have a Vidal Canary, I have Vishkal as a 7-drop. I have that's my only 7-drop. Like I have a couple of 6-drops and a couple of 5s, but that's probably more than you have.
yeah, my
And so
my curve is super low, like super, super low.
right. So for me in that deck, Edgar is there obviously for the tokens, obviously. But he's an extra card in my hand. Like I generally have something I can do with that mana. But if it turns out that I don't, I'm like, sure, I'll slam Edgar. It doesn't matter if he goes back to the command zone because I don't really
Right.
need to cast him.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
Some
you hit on
board states,
right. And so you hit on a great point is the number of lands in your deck should be reflective of what your strategy is. If your strategy is to play things that are more expensive, like a mid-range deck, then you're going to want more lands. Where I know in my Edgar Markov deck, the plan is to be super aggressive and I might be able to kill someone before I cast Edgar Markov, which allows me to run slightly less lands. And when I say slightly less, I mean I run 36 still
Yeah.
and with a
Mhm.
tithe, and I've thought about Gift of Estates, but haven't pulled the trigger on it yet.
But I run like I've obviously got Legion's Landing. I've also found Phyrexian Tower to be really sweet with the tokens.
Which one's Tower?
You tap and sack a
What's that?
creature to add 2 black.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah, that seems good.
Yeah, that's really good. That just gets me over the hill, like over the
Ooh,
hump. Like sometimes
yeah,
when I just need to hit 5 or 6, it's actually
I should
really
add.
good.
Yeah, I should add that one. That one sounds good.
Yeah, there are ways to do it, right? But
Right. And so like my Edgar Markov deck, I have 4 or 5 drops, I think, maybe 5 drops. That's pretty much the end of the curve, other than Edgar Markov himself. Like,
hmm. I'll send you my more mid-rangey list and you can have a look because it's got some sweet plays.
cool.
So yeah, as regards to the mulligan, I think it's generally good for the format in the sense that there will be less non-games, right?
Right.
I think it does change things for those higher level tables.
Let me shift gears on you for a second. So, you're against it, I'm against it. It's basically already happened by this point.
Mhm.
What has your actual experience been with the London Mulligan? Like in games that you've played and you've seen it, what have you seen from those games?
So range, I guess. Some of that experience has been that it hasn't had much impact at all.
I've had some of that same as well, where it actually doesn't seem like it's impacting nearly as negatively as I thought, but it also seems like it's really hard to quantify.
Yes, and I think it's too early to say. I don't think there's enough data yet to sort of confirm deny any of the sort of thoughts on it from that sort of perspective.
Right. And, like, yeah, we talk about like crazy big explosive plays, but like, the reality is, when I went to Magic Fest Dallas, I think we played like 20 games in 2 days. It was a lot of Commander, and I didn't see it to be a problem. Like, and it was weird where my actual experience differed from everything that I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. My current experience so far is that it's not had a huge impact, but you can't say that for sure without seeing your opponent's hands and their decks, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly the problem is I'm not seeing, what are they catching on that last card off the top that either makes their hand keepable or not.
Yeah,
Um,
I played against an Estrid deck the other day, and we were playing with the London Mulligan, and they played the enchantment that lets their land tap for three. Um,
oh yeah, yeah.
and then they played the next turn, they played the one that and then attached it to another land. Played Estrid and tapped them. Played the 6 mana spell to go and grab two enchantments. You can crew fix, and I was just like, I mean,
Bleh.
the chances of getting that sequence without Slim anyway, did that mulligan help? Who knows? It
Right.
scooped pretty quick after that. Like,
Yeah, yeah. And, sure, it's one example. I like your point of we don't have enough data yet. And to some degree, maybe we have to look to like the 60 card formats where you have a lot of really measurable data about like matchups and things like that. I find that measuring things in Commander is really difficult because everyone's playing to different power levels and it's just hard to measure. It's really hard to quantify things in Commander without having just like large amounts of data. So one last thing on the London Mulligan, you mentioned Grenzo Dungeon Warden. You can put cards to the bottom of your library. Does seem like a little bit of an issue there.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I think I mean, more power to you if you build your deck to take advantage of that, but gonna care enough. And I don't think that Vanifar just came out right in
Right.
Ravnica Allegiance, and everyone's like, oh my god, it's a birthing pod and it does everything in combos, and it's like, have you seen that? Like, I've seen it like once maybe online, and then that's about it, right?
Right. I knew a guy who was playing it at my shop, and he was basically saying, if you untap with it, you win the game. If you don't, you do nothing.
Yeah, right. And I don't think Renzo's anywhere near that level of like, oh my god, broken. It's just a cool, neat thing, right?
Well, there is a CEDH Doomsday Grenzo list, but in a lot of the competitive testing that I've done of late, I don't see it show up very often anymore. So I don't know if it's as good as it used to be, but it was a thing at one point. So I would just say that, like, if it becomes a problem, then either
Probably just
you
ban Grenzo, right?
either ban Grenzo or do the logistically weird thing of say that they have to shuffle their library instead of put a card to the bottom.
Yeah, sure.
So London Mulligan, we talked about a bunch. Both of us kind of against it from a theoretical standpoint, but like we've said, it hasn't seemed like it's been that much of a problem in reality. But we really need a lot of data to understand what it does or how much of a problem it causes.
Agreed. Um, and I think there's one thing at least that informs my perspective on that a little. Of Magic I play and the kind of colors that I play, which I think might be interesting and might come up in the next topic, which is about sideboards.
Yeah. This is the question that they posted my response to. And as far as like questions that I answered, I wasn't expecting my response to show up for this one, but it did. So we'll also put a timestamp to that in the description below as well. And my response in the video was essentially that I'm okay with the wish style cards that reference a sideboard because most of them are bad or aren't good enough to matter or make a significant impact on the format. Most of the wishes are terrible outside of Glittering Wish and Burning Wish. Burning Wish would be a huge pickup for red. Most of the other wishes I don't really care that much about. They're overcosted or they do something horrible. And it's like you can run them if you want to, but you have better options already.
Right.
The two that I missed that I probably didn't spend enough time thinking about were Karn the
Books
Great
from the
Curia.
Blind Eternities.
That's the Search and Eldrazi one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that one doesn't bother me. I mean, there's other
Doesn't
ways.
bother me either. It's just interesting
Right,
because it exists, right?
right. Like you can just leave an Eldrazi in your sideboard and grab it if you want to. Seems fine. It's not really that different than just like tutoring a creature out of your deck.
No.
So that one's fine with me. The big one, Spawn Sire of Ulamog, I'm fine with. You pretty much need like near infinite mana to be able to do that anyway. And if you have that much mana, there's just other ways to win the game. So, if you go off in a big like flurry of Eldrazi, sure, fine, have at it.
Yeah, right.
The two that I missed in my analysis were Karn the Great Creator. Being able to pull artifacts out from your sideboard can be a bit problematic. And the other one is the other black card, which they showed on screen while I was talking, but wasn't actually the one that I was referencing verbally, is Mastermind's Acquisition. Choose one. It's Diabolic Tutor, or choose a card from outside the game and put that into your hand. So Diabolic Tutor from your sideboard or from your library, pick one. Um,
Nice and flexible. How I like
ye-
my gods to be.
right. So, the one thing I thought about that is that you could theoretically run a sideboard of like 15 answer cards to, whatever problem you need to get rid of. In my lower power decks, I often make the mistake of not running enough graveyard removal,
Hmm.
graveyard hate. And if you had a 15 card sideboard, you can put Relic and Rest in Peace and all the anti graveyard goodies in your sideboard and not have to like main deck them, which does actually concern me a little bit. So it might be like you might need a ban Mastermind's Acquisition.
Yeah, I think that one of the corners that people cut the most is graveyard hate, which I'm not sure why everyone just isn't running scavenger grounds at this point. Like,
You want to know I've had incredible success with Tormod's Crypt.
yeah, Thomas Coates great and reusable too.
I've had
Um,
so many people say to me, I would have won the game if you didn't have Tormod's Crypt out. I'm like, yeah, I know.
hmm,
Literally a 0 mana artifact that just drop it out, turn one for free.
yeah.
Okay, do
Um,
graveyard things. I dare you.
I think the Khan thing with the Microsynth Lattice, for instance, I mean, it's a combo, right? But
Right,
that kind of ties in nicely with kind of the things that we were saying about Paradox Engine, in that currently there are people trying to shoehorn that combo into so many different modern and legacy decks just to see if it'll work. Like,
right,
and I think that that is potentially going to be that kind of level of will it work in quite a lot of different commander decks, because who wouldn't want to stop your opponents tapping lands, right? If you're super competitive and that's all you cared about.
right. So yeah, like you can slam Karn and then grab Static Orb or Winter Orb, which is, those are really common in competitive play.
Or
So
just Microsynth Lattice, because it makes their lands into artifacts, and Khan
yeah.
Static says they can't activate abilities of
Oh
artifacts.
yeah, I forgot about that. Okay, yeah, I forgot about all that as well. So
Yeah, so
the static ability will get, but even still, it would still be pay 4, cast Karn, activate, grab your card.
and yeah, and then pay 6, right?
Yeah,
So
and then you have to pay 6 to get that card in. So like you reveal the card, opponents can see what's coming. In casual play, that would be terrible because that's not the easiest thing to answer. In competitive play, there are so many easier ways to lock the game out, which is just like fabricate into Winter Orb. Goblin Engineer is actually insane. Like I've been playing that card in Akiri, and now I have like guaranteed access to Winter Orb. Yeah, it's stupid. Like it's insanely good.
I've been trying it in mono red and heb, and it's just like pretty sweet, just
Yeah,
grabbing stuff.
yeah, it's
Especially if
ridiculous.
you have like a trash for treasure in your hand, like
Oh yeah,
whoa.
yep. So yeah, like for casual, it's definitely going to be a little bit too strong. For competitive, there are more efficient ways to already lock the game out like that, and they'll kind of see it coming.
Hmm,
So it'll be annoying when it gets you, but it is somewhat preventable in that when you talk about competitive play, most people play blue, so they have counter spells.
right, yeah.
With it'll be interesting with Paradox Engine being banned now. Are people going to run less artifact hate?
Yeah, it's an interesting question actually, because people love to cut corners with their decks, and more often than not, edge towards cutting answers rather than parts of their combo or their strategy.
Right. So the answer would be again I play Akiri Bruce in my competitive setting. The answer would be they play Karn, they activate on their next turn when they untap. They try to slam Mycosynth Lattice, and the answer is you float 2 mana in response to that, and then just disenchant it or something like that, smelt, crush,
Right.
whatever.
And people
But
should have answers, right? They just should.
right, right. But now if I'm running less artifact removal because I don't need to worry about Paradox Engine, um, I could see myself running into an issue right there. But
Statistically, it doesn't affect a huge amount of players, I don't think.
right.
And
Um,
it is at the end of the day also like it's one of those conversations you have when you sit down, right?
yeah, like I have a sideboard card. Is it cool to use this sideboard card?
I think just to take the devil's advocate, I guess it could stale to have that technology available. I think that an issue in Commander anyway, centralizing your deck on good cards, just being good. And some people like to play like that, and sometimes I will play like that. But when there's a lot of incentive to run a card, even outside of a theme, it's not necessarily a good thing if there's too many of those cards. And I think that if there is no incentive to not taking a sideboard, you're going to run into a lot of similar cards more often than not, with format a little more stale.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Like, so like we talked about, Burning Wish is probably the best of the wish cards. Mastermind's Acquisition, probably honestly would need to get banned. But if you have access to those, you're probably going to be grabbing the same two or three things every time.
Yeah. And at
One
that
of
point, it's like, well, why wouldn't they just be in your deck?
Because it doesn't need to eat up deck slots in your deck. And that's the interesting other side to that, is that if this card's in your sideboard, it's not actually in your deck. So like, let's say with Karn, I get it. But if something happens to Karn, you can't get that Mycosynth Lattice out of your sideboard unless you use, one
Yeah.
of the other very limited cards that pull cards from your sideboard. So, like, potentially, if you're having the card in the sideboard, it could just get stuck there if someone counters the thing that's trying to pull it out of the sideboard.
Right, exactly.
So just sort of an interesting thing to think about. But yeah, like I said, I'm still okay with having a sideboard, but I would probably ban Mastermind's Acquisition in Karn because of the ease of just grabbing something that is a problem that like it allows you to not have to make difficult decisions about answers that you might want to run to things.
And I think the only issue potentially there is that, like you said, if it's in your sideboard and you can't get it, then
It's not coming into
what are
the
you gonna
game.
do? It's
Yeah,
not coming into the game, right? And it's
right. It's
like
not a problem.
at that
Yeah.
deck building argument does come up a little bit there too. So I guess maybe the lazy deck building angle does come in there a little too.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe running more answers. And if you're thinking about just shipping them into a sideboard, then wrong approach.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. Like there's some reasons why I think it's fine. And then, like we talked about, there's some lazy deck building that could go on as well. But there's some caveats is like, all right, well, if you stop the thing that pulls it out, then it's probably not really even a big deal. But interestingly, it was a question that like I wasn't really aware was a hot topic issue anyway.
I agree. To me, it was always something on the sidelines, on the periphery
Right.
that yes, some people like to play Commander this way, but it's been that way for a long. Most of those people will just sit down in a pod and say, "Can I play my deck that has a wish board?" And people will either say yes or no. And I don't
Right.
think Khan coming out has really conversation on much.
Right. As a funny anecdote, I used to play with this one kid at a shop that he's like, before every game, he played a mono black deck, and he would go, "Hey, there's one band card. Can I use it as my commander?" And we're like, "Which one?" He's like, "Grizzlebrand." I'm like, "Absolutely not. That's like the most broken card ever."
Yeah. I was at the shop the other week and I was chatting to some of the sort of more newer players, less seasoned, a bit more green, and
Yeah.
they were complaining about playing against an Eldrazi player. And so I was like obviously asking them, like how was the games? What was happening? And blah blah blah, Emrakul. And I'm like and it turns out that this person had been sitting down and saying, "Can I play with this Emrakul?" And everyone was just saying yes to be nice. And
Oh God. Yeah.
it's your own funeral at that point,
Right.
but like, geez, just say no. Like, you
Yeah.
can say no. Like,
Yeah. You
it's
you
for a
can't play
reason,
the win.
right?
Yeah. You can't play your 15 mana win the game Emrakul. No, that's not a
Yeah,
thing that you can
yeah,
do.
yeah.
Anyway, we'll wrap it up there. Once again, where can people find you?
Okay, so you can find me on Twitter at the Kristen Emily. We can just type that up and have that underneath. I'm currently doing a bit of a giveaway. I won my pre-release and won some cool Ultimate Guard stuff, so I'm going to give away a few things too. So if you want to go and find my tweet and retweet that, then you can possibly get you
Very
as
cool.
well. I write articles over at masterofmagics.com, mostly Commander, but I do dip into draft as well.
Sweet.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at. Also, I want to say big thanks to you, PJ, for inviting me on here today.
You're very welcome.
It's been great. Really enjoyed it. Definitely one
Awesome.
of my favorite content creators anyway. So it was really sweet to be able to just have a bit more of an extended chat with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate all the kind words. And I'd like to thank you for coming on as well. And with that, I think we'll wrap everything up. As always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching.